Howdy folks, it is Scanner here. Welcome to the first episode of Trench Crusade Mysteries of 2026. This is a series where I speculate. I talk about things that may or may not be happening in the world of Trench Crusade, normally based off pressing questions for the community about stuff that we simply don't know. And from my point of view, I'm giving kind of answers that might be interesting or drawn somehow from some kind of real world basis, or just might be things that I think the developers might do based off the design language and mechanics that they're opting for in Trench Crusade. So this week is actually one of the biggest and perhaps one of the worst timed videos I'm ever going to do, as it's what is happening in America, which is what the title of the video is going to be called, and certainly won't lead to any confusion at all in the comment section from people who don't know what Trench Crusade is. But anyway, this is like the question for a huge percentage of Trench Crusade players, because a lot of Trench Crusade players are based over in the States and they all want to know what's happening with America. There's a lot of kind of headcanon and there's a lot of fantasy answers and weird shit that people come up with as to what they want to do, and a lot of it doesn't make any particular sense because people don't always have like a tremendous grasp on the world of Trench Crusade or what it's like or what it is, but you can have a lot of fun basically reading people's theories, so hopefully you have some fun with this one. So folks who lack a basic understanding of Trench Crusade beyond the concept of Demon World War I will often leave comments on my videos talking about cool iterations of the current era, basically, of the United States that would be cool in the game. And I must confess, it's always fun to tell that particular type of poster that America in that way is highly unlikely to exist in the game in that sense. So European history never really developed the same way it did in the real world, and much of that era of exploration simply didn't happen the same way. There was highly unlikely to have been a Pilgrim's Landing at Plymouth Rock, and the concept of Western expansionism and manifest destiny and all that kind of stuff is just highly unlikely to have played out in the same way, if it played out at all. So from what we currently know or can guess, we can only assume that the discovery and development and the societies that will emerge from the Americas, which I guess I should be calling the New World in this instance, avoiding any confusion. I'm just going to call them the New World. I think it's a suitably Europe-centric view of things because that's like the basis of the game. So I don't mind sticking with the New World. But boom. Anyway, we know that the Crown of Aragon and Castile was willing to essentially sacrifice Ireland the bastards during the invasion of that country in order to maintain control of their routes and shipping lanes to the New World. So the New World certainly exists, and it's been found by, at the very least, the Spanish and most likely the French as well, and we can also assume the Portuguese and maybe even whatever, other little foundling states and monarchies there are around the place. It's very unlikely that the Crown of England never really got the presence that they had in the real world history over there at all, so we can assume that no country called America ever needed to declare itself as an independent state from the Crown and the Commonwealth. However, it is quite likely that there's still some elements and members of like British English Empire-ish society over there. They will simply completely lack the influence that they would have had in the real world. Anyway, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself just a little bit here. So there's some things we need to sort out first. We need to decide what could and could not happen, or potentially did or did not happen in the world of Trench Crusade with regards to colonization. Now, I see a lot of people saying that there's no way that colonization happened because Europe would have been way too caught up in dealing with the wars with the Gates of Hell and all that kind of stuff. But those incursions, remember, they're not constant, they're not there all the time. It's not like Europe threw a even close to big percentage of its efforts or whatever into colonization until that thing became a proven possibility. So I'm kind of the opinion that for all the reasons that people profess that colonization would not have occurred because the gates of hell were right there, I would argue colonization definitely occurred because the gates of hell were right there. They were probably looking for somewhere to be as far away from that shit as possible. They may not at those times have understood the concepts of the, wandering, migrating gate in the north. They didn't know that another gate could be opened in Ireland and all that kind of stuff. They may have just been looking to get away to a blissful new place that wasn't, gonna have demons rolling all over it. So for as much argument as there is that they were diverting resources from real world needs into this fictional world need, that fictional world need was also providing a very strong reason to just go and explore. Anyway, I keep doing this. I keep sidetracking because I don't really keep real notes for this shit. I just blather, I guess. Anyway, we basically have little reason to think that things were not close to similar. We don't have much reason to think that, let's say, the Nordics, the Norse, when they arrived in Newfoundland, they probably didn't do anything more in Trench Crusade than they did in the real world. So you probably had like a couple of settlements, and that was about the size of it. In 1914, in Trench Crusade, and maybe since the late to mid 1600s, let's say, it seems like the heretics were showing a solid enough naval presence. So the timeline also says that heretics get access to the Atlantic routes themselves in 1666. So if we wish, we can then assume that some version of real world history played out up to that point, and we might as well assume that the heretics got to the New World as well, maybe around the late 1600s to early 1700s. As such, there's multiple potential points of divergence. This is what I've been getting at this whole time. I just take forever to make my points. So we have multiple potential points of divergence of various moments in history that developers can take to really make the development of the continent different. But I do very much feel that people are way too confident in their own interpretations of how this would have all played out. It's also the source of a huge amount of fighting in the community, which is fucking hilarious to me. It's a game, you nerds. Don't take this shit too seriously. It's supposed to be funny. Anyway, one of the common slap fights that occurs is around the idea of the Aztecs. There are quite a few theories floating around that they'd still be around and they'd somehow be some kind of a dominant society. I've seen people claim without any basis whatsoever, and I've seen this said repeatedly by dopes from what I can tell, that the natives of the New World have somehow thrown off every attempt at colonization or invasion, regardless of the source, be that European colonizers or the heretics themselves or the potential presence of the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent there if there's an open gate or anything like that. But no, apparently, like, for some reason there's a section of the Trench Crusade fanon that has decided the Aztecs are just like Chad techs, basically, and I'm not really sure what that is about. Let's have a quick look here at what actually happened in real world history. So, there's not much reason, in my opinion, to think that things would be dramatically different for the Aztecs, given how they were essentially like just big brothered by the Spanish pretty quickly in real life. One of the main reasons for that was that a large volume of former allies of the Aztecs, as well as their rivals and political rivals and social rivals and economic rivals, were more than happy to team up with the Spanish and anybody else who was around to kick the Aztecs' asses via the good old diplomatic channel of killing them and wiping out their empire and society. They were like not exactly the most liked people at the time for various reasons. So to quickly run through some major events from the colonization of the New World IRL, You've got Columbus lands in the Bahamas in 1492. Do we really think there's absolutely no reason for Columbus to go and search for whatever the fuck it was he was searching for in the world of Trench Crusade? I don't think so. What are they going to do? Go, no, you can't have your ship. In 1500, Pedro Alvarez Cabral takes Brazil for Portugal. I'm sorry if I butcher these pronunciations. I'm just trying to have a good time here. 1521, you have the fall of the Aztecs to Cortez. 1533, you've got the fall of the Incas to Francisco Pizarro for the Spanish. So the argument that the Aztecs or Incas would be like dominant and advanced society in the world of Trench Crusade doesn't make a huge amount of sense, because they were both dealt with prettily handily by the people who decided to deal with them. So at any point, basically, the implication is if somebody decides to deal with them, they're going to get fucking dealt with. It's highly unlikely they're going to be a dominant society in the world of Trench Crusade. Now, I have an inkling. I'm going to be as cautious as I can with how I say this. I know that one of the reasons why people really want the Aztecs or the Incas or the Norse or anybody else to have a really strong presence is that they kind of want a blending of pantheons and faiths, and they want all this introduction of all this stuff from all across the globe to be in the game. But I think you're barking up the wrong fucking bush when it comes to that one, for a start. I feel like the focus will remain Abrahamic. I feel like the things that are worked in will always have a reason to be Abrahamic. And the main reason why America would be Abrahamic would be effective colonization from Europe. In this case, through the Spanish, through the French, through the Dutch, through the whatever. I think what would make far more sense would be to, because of the potential pressures on Europe and a focus more on cooperation, essentially to colonize than on conquering, you likely have far more presence from First Nations tribes in America than you would otherwise. I think that's a reasonable way to go. And that I think there would be like a tremendous amount of conversion over into Abrahamic religions in order to make that happen within the game. And that's just being realistic. That is just the way that I see it. So another thing that you really need to kind of think about here is like the development of America would be dramatically different. And I wouldn't be surprised if a Trench Crusade America, given the sheer number of monarchies in Trench Crusade, remember the dominant example of democracy in Trench Crusade is Prussia, for weird Prussian reasons. Almost every other place you're looking at a monarchy. So why would there not be a bunch of monarchies over in the States? There would either be independent monarchies that formulated somehow from the like social detritus of what was occurring over there, or you would have lands and duchies and places and fiefdoms owned by, essentially, or controlled by, you can't own land, man, controlled by European powers. And potentially you would then have these vast tracts of land and nationhood that are still under the control of First Nations people, and likely within there you have a degree of like infighting between all of those potentially. What really matters here, the most important question for all of this stuff is, did the heretics make it over there, and in what way? Because they're not going to care one way or the other. And there's no like guarantee of peace basically between the ones that exist. Just look at the wars of Triclavianism. But what is likely to force cooperation between them all would be a strong heretic and demonic presence on the continent. If the whole place is like potentially dangerous, then you're likely going to stick with humanity just a little more than the demons from the abyss. Who knew? But one of the more important things to think about is you likely have no moment of revolution You have no constitution. You have no moment where the Americas really become a unified the Americas. You likely have no Bill of Rights. There's simply not, as I said, very many democracies in the world of French Crusade. So that focus of America as being the claimed focus, I will say, of America as being all about like individual rights and stuff is probably just not really going to develop the same way at all. So I think that once again, it potentially leaves you open to like colonies or odd monarchies of their own. Almost more likely that would occur than any other occurrence. The people who are colonizing this new world are likely even more religious than the folks who did in real life, if you were to believe it. Why? A, they exist in a world where demons and God are effectively, provably real. So what more do you want? That could either bode extremely well or extremely poorly for native populations. If you go back and if you look historically at the church's stance on various elements throughout history of our more negative ways that humans treat humans, the church has done a lot of flip-flopping based on internal power struggles and the people who were in charge. There was points where the church was, kind of okay with slavery, and there was points where the church was definitely not okay with slavery. The most consistent thing is that in many ways the church's opinion on this stuff, even back in the day, didn't matter. It wasn't an effective deterrent of the types of things that were occurring over there. So you've got all these people who are extremely faithful, right? Think about how faithful you need to be, not just to embrace the dangers of the sea crossings as they existed in real life, but throw in a heretic navy on top of that stuff, who's likely plundering the seas for slaves and for supplies and for everything else, and setting up their own colonies and cities and settlements over in the Americas. So you're willing to take that on, and the reason why you're willing to take that on is because you potentially feel like God himself is telling you to. Like, Jesus, that's going to get like pretty crazy. So essentially, in my version, in my head canon for now of America, it's an even more brutal and enormous land grab than it was, paradoxically driven by a heightened sense of safety if you can get there, but also heightened risk depending on what exactly the heretics are doing and how they are established in relation to the new world, and also your fellow faithful. As you get further and further away, this has been a pretty consistent issue within the development of the world of Trench Crusade, is as things get further away from the church and as the church finds things harder to control, those things become wilder, shall we say, and negative influences can be stronger, and things that set out on the right path and what they feel is a path of like righteousness and religion and all that kind of stuff can meander into deeper and darker places. So you probably even have like a ton of fallen societies that were set up by faithful elements in good faith, looking to do good things for the war effort and all that kind of stuff, over time potentially just fall to the demons anyway, through elements of like greed and fear and all that kind of stuff. That could happen multiple times across the country, so you end up with this kind of bubbling cauldron of doubt and suspicion and fear as to what is going on over there. You also have probably the other side of things, where the sense of righteousness, as well as that same distance from the reality of things, leads to a tremendously strong and fervent desire to fight in the war, so that you can, you get like new powerful groups of like trench pilgrims and crusader orders and militias all on their way to New Antioch and the Levant and the no man's land to kick some ass. So that would be my take on it. How it all plays out in the game, I've no idea. What way the devs are actually going to do it, I've no idea. But I think it would make sense to have a degree of colonization occur, just with less impact. The main nation impact that I would take out of it would be the British, because then you don't have that galvanizing, solidifying effect of a thing that becomes the Americas, and you do have this beautifully wide open interpretation of how the New World may have developed without that kind of no taxation, without representation catalyst for people kind of coming together and uniting their efforts and creating a society that they saw as being kind of, antithetical to the monarchy that they were attempting to free themselves from. So you can have a bunch of little monarchies over there, maybe a bunch of like meager kings or something, all thinking that they're doing the right thing and kind of occasionally warring with each other, but mostly focused on trying to do the war well and becoming this enormous battery in a way for the war that was occurring on the other side of the Atlantic. I don't know, it could be a good way to do it, but mostly the devs can do whatever the fuck they want because it's their game. And I would hope that we will eventually see it down the line. I know that one of the bigger concerns in the community is this idea that, like, at no point has this stuff been mentioned, or has there been a hint of any of this stuff mentioned in the game's lore. But welcome to game lore, folks. Like, I don't know how to break it to you, but your favorite game, if you go back in time, at one point the lore was extremely bare bones, and all the stuff that you now think is like foundational and the most important shit in the world, and the type of lore that absolutely makes the game, it didn't actually arrive in the game until the game was like 10 years old. So deal with it. The best example of that is the Horus Heresy, which is one of the like key and pivotal moments that has probably shaped the tone and theme and subtext and drama of the world of Warhammer 40k more than pretty much any other thing. Didn't exist when I was a kid. I don't know how else to explain that to people. This is just the way that games are developed over time. Anyways, as always, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful start to your 2026. Please like the video, but only if you actually like the video. Don't forget to curate your subscriptions feed and focus in on the things that you want to see more of, and check for them there, not your homepage, which is where random stuff appears. Thank you all. Let me know in the comment section. I'm expecting the comments to be wild on this one. This is way too big a subject to go into like enormous detail in a singular video, so I'm actually willing to do multiple videos about the minutia of this one because it's just so big. So if you have any comments or thoughts or suggestions or whatever, drop them in the comments. All the best, folks.